I never set out to start a business and to become an entrepreneur. It was a change of mindset.
British scientist and health expert Samantha Decombel recently had her invitation to speak at a European scientific conference cancelled because she was 7 months pregnant.
You were effectively discriminated against by the European Commission. Talk to me about that time. What happened?
It was a real shock. You've still got to pay your rent, you've still got to put food on the table. It all came crashing down with the diagnosis. Sometimes taking a risk is something worth doing because even if it fails, ultimately you've gone on that journey and you've had that experience. It's about where your state of mind is and your perspective on life and your approach to life.
Sam, welcome to the Virtuous Mindset.
Thank you very much for having me, Shivani.
No, I'm really glad we're talking because I was just thinking about how long we've known each other. I think it's been like 5 years, and I remember when I graduated, you were one of my first clients, and then we did that event together, the Power of Mentoring event. You were a speaker, and at that time, I think you were pregnant as well. So it was,
That would be about right, yes.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time. But this feels like a full circle moment to be sitting here talking about your experiences, learning more about your businesses and your mindset. Before we get started, as a CEO, what does it mean to you to have a virtuous mindset?
Well, I thought about this question, and I think obviously mindset, it implies a state of mind and thinking about particularly perspective for me. So I guess the whole reason that I started my business in the first place, I never set out to start a business and to become an entrepreneur. It was a change of mindset that led to that, and it was actually losing my dad to esophageal cancer when he was in his 50s. He was 57 at the time. And it changed my whole outlook, my mindset on the way that I viewed risk, particularly. I'd always thought about setting up my own business, having that flexibility of being my own boss, and the perspective of losing my dad and, thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen now? The £20,000 that I had in my bank account, which I'd saved up through my PhD to put towards a first house, I would have written that money off that day to have had my dad back. So it really put it in perspective for me that it's just about life experience, and that sometimes taking a risk is something that is worth doing because even if it fails, ultimately you've gone on that journey and you've had that experience, which has value in its own right. So for me, just to summarize the question, I guess, is virtuous mindset is about where your state of mind is and your perspective on life and how you view life and your approach to life.
Right, and I think that the conversation that you had with your dad was really pivotal in your career, and we'll talk about that for sure. But I was doing my research into you, and from what I gathered, you graduated from the University of Birmingham, and then you had a whole host of different roles, from technology transfer manager, fund manager, lab assistant, freelance associate, and then you're working for yourself, and we're going to talk about the businesses. Talk me through that journey from where you started up to the point where just before you decided to set up your own businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting having it played back because I forget a lot of the things that I've done over the course of that time. And I think for me, there's always been an element of doing the things that interest me. And I remember when I graduated, we had a talk by Adam Hart-Davis at the time. And he said to the audience of students and the audience of parents, he's never thought about a career in his life. He's only ever done the things that he's enjoyed, and that's got him, so far in life, and he's had a good life. And the parents were all absolutely horrified because they all wanted us to have good, stable careers and not be very clear in terms of what we wanted to do with our lives. But actually, I thought about it and I think that fits me very well because I'd done a degree because I enjoyed science. I love science. I'm fascinated by all elements of the natural world, particularly. Yeah. And I didn't know what I wanted to do after I'd finished that course, so I did a PhD, which is the number one reason not to do a PhD, according to most academics. Yeah. But I really enjoyed that. I learned some great skills, some great transferable skills from doing a PhD in terms of independent working, particularly, and managing my own time, managing my own projects, coming up with my own ideas. But I knew I didn't want to stay in academia. I sort of got to that point where studying one very small facet of one thing, for me, it lost its gloss, as it were. So I decided that what I wanted to do at that point, having tried lots of different sort of careers options, lots of workshops and opportunities while I was at university to sort of see different career opportunities. I found one called technology transfer, which was helping academics to commercialise their research in a university setting. And what really appealed to me about that was the opportunity to help academics to commercialise their research. It was at the cutting edge. It was getting it out there to the public where it could be of benefit to people. And I was touching on lots of different sciences, which was really fascinating. So I went down that road because that's what I thought, well, this is what's caught my eye at this time. And it was while I was working as a technology transfer manager that my dad was diagnosed.
Yeah.
So all of those subsequent roles, in a way, when I'd made the decision to quit my role as a technology transfer manager to set up my own business, you still have to pay the bills.
Yeah.
I didn't have a big, I had some money and I put that money into the lab and into developing the project. You've still got to pay your rent. You've still got to put food on the table. So I had to take on second jobs to keep that money coming in at the time. I lived with my partner, who was a student, postdoctoral researcher at the time. And yeah, we just needed to, I needed to do something to keep the money coming in. So I took on lots of part-time roles. The fund manager role was a maternity cover, which was really convenient, 12-month placements. I did everything in that time from working at the Royal Mail Postal Office early in the morning. I'd do a couple of hours before cycling to work. I did babysitting in the evenings. Just what I needed to do really to make ends meet.
Wow, that's quite a journey. And the fact that you did all these different things alongside it makes all the difference. And you mentioned something, obviously you mentioned that your dad being diagnosed with esophageal cancer, stage 4, which was really the thing that propelled you to decide to start your own business. What was the conversation that you had with your dad? Because I'm sure that must have been difficult to have, but also it got you to where you are now, I suppose.
Yeah. I often think back on that. It was a real sliding doors moment, and I wonder what life would have been if obviously what had happened didn't happen.
Yeah.
I think I'd probably still be working as a technology transfer manager, perhaps, in a university department somewhere. No, it was... my dad was 57, as I say, when he was diagnosed, and he was stage 4. He was late stage. He was 3 years short of retirement. He'd got grand plans for what he was going to do when he retired. He'd sort of planned in advance. He was going to go travelling with my mum, and they were going to see the world. There were so many places he wanted to visit. They'd been saving up for it, and it all came crashing down with the diagnosis. They did try and book something, a trip over to Hawaii, which is an island he'd always wanted to visit, and they couldn't get insurance cover because of the late stage of his cancer, and they didn't want to take the risk of travelling and obviously having issues with getting back. So he never got to make that journey, and he said to us all, myself, my brother and my sister at the time, if there's anything you want to do, you should just go and do it, because you can plan all these things, and sometimes life just doesn't work out that way. So if there's something you want to go do, go and do it now. So I took him at his word, and after I quit my job, I went travelling around Africa for 6 weeks, which is, again, something I'd always wanted to do, take a gap year, see the world a bit. Never got around to it. I'd always been bouncing from one thing to the next. So I took some time out, and I got that out of my system. And when I came back, that's when I decided to set up my first business.
Yeah, Play DNA. Well, we're going to definitely talk about that, but I feel that's so inspiring because so many people struggle to take the risk to go and set up their own business. So the fact that those words had such an impact on you and it made you decide to go ahead and go full swing and take that risk is what really makes the difference. But Play DNA obviously was your first business. How did you come up with the idea of Play DNA, and what is Play DNA for those that don't know?
It was very random. My partner, long-term partner, Stuart, at the time, he was working as a postdoctoral researcher at Oxford in genetics as well. And a friend of his had mentioned that he'd seen a company online that did DNA artwork, and he was really keen. He was looking for a birthday gift for his sister. He wanted something particularly unusual. He thought this would appeal to her because she was a scientist as well. And he asked Stuart, is this something, because they were very expensive, he said, is this something you could do, as a favour for a mate? And Stuart was telling me about this, and we were having a look at this company online. And I was saying to him, well, this is, there's no information with the image that they provide. So this could be an image of anyone's DNA. It could be a banana's DNA for all you know. Why wouldn't you put some information in there that said something about the person? Because I think that would be much more interesting.
Right.
And I guess I just latched onto that concept of this is something that I'd done in my PhD. I'd worked with a technique called allele-specific PCR, where we created these banding patterns of DNA, and depending on the particular patterning of the band, it would tell you what version of a particular gene you had. So I thought, well, I could apply this technique to creating these portraits, and then I could also tell people something about themselves.
Wow.
So everything from, whether you've got a blue eye gene or a brown eye gene, because obviously we can have hidden genes. Brown eye carriers could carry hidden blue eyes. Morning, evening preference. But we also did genes related to sports performance. So that's things like metabolic efficiency, fat burning potential, whether you've got the gene for speed, as the media dub it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Almost like you're combining your experience coming from a science background with your entrepreneurial flair to be able to do both, which is quite interesting. But you had a lot of success. You were featured on Forbes magazine, BBC Radio, LAB Times, and then went on Dragon's Den. What was it like going on the Den for you? That's quite an experience. I remember seeing the clip and thinking, wow.
Yeah, this is, you mentioned earlier about the taking a risk, and sometimes you look back on life and you remember these things and it makes you smile, because it's, I don't know, it's like we did that thing and it was fun and exciting. It was nothing like a real pitch, because obviously subsequently we went on to do, we raised funding. We've raised, for the current company, we've raised over £8 million pounds in funding to date. So we've done a lot of that now. Yeah. This was our first experience, and Dragon's Den was nothing like the real life experience of going out and raising capital for business. It was, how to describe it, we were in the green room for over 8 hours before we went in for the filming, which was very short. It was only about 40 minutes long.
Okay.
I think we got about a 30-second clip on the TV as a result of that. But it was very positive. We got some really good feedback from Deborah Meaden, particularly. And Peter Jones did say to us that he would fund us if Stuart proposed to
I saw that
in the studio, which he refused. So he said he missed the best opportunity of his life to say, I'm out.
But I feel like you'd want something a bit more romantic, right? Rather than him.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a bit of a joke with Peter at the time. But I was very relieved. He did eventually propose a year later in a much more romantic location in Stratford. So
that's how you want it. So
exactly. It was a moment for us rather than a PR stunt. So absolutely.
I guess in a way it gave you the publicity that you needed to showcase your product and talk about it, which I think makes all the difference. And I suppose, what advice would you give to others that want to go on the Den, that are nervous about taking that decision and leap of faith? Is there anything you'd say? I
mean, I think it's just to give it a go. I think the best advice you can give someone that is planning to do something like that is just to be well prepared. We were very clearly drilled by the team that went in there to see where our weaknesses might be. A lot of questions were asked. And we could see where there were other individuals that perhaps weren't as sharp on the numbers, say. It was very clear that that's where they targeted their questioning when they went in. So I think just being very confident, going in, well prepared, confident, and just having fun with it. Because for most people, Dragon's Den particularly is more about profile raising than necessarily the investment. The investment is a bonus. But obviously the PR that you can get off the back of a good performance on Dragon's Den is something you can't buy. Did it really make a difference after you went on Dragon's Den? In terms of
No.
That's the irony. No, which is another really interesting point, actually, in terms of ensuring you get the correct, you match the demographic of the audience that you're trying to target from a marketing perspective.
Right.
And with Dragon's Den, with Play DNA, we had a very expensive product. It took 2 days to create, 2 days of me in the lab full time, working on generating the banding patterns, doing the validation tests, and then actually creating the artwork and editing the artwork, creating the booklets. Everyone was individually printed because obviously you can't do multiple copies. Everyone's unique. So it was very expensive. We had to sell it at a significant price in order to recoup those costs and to make any sort of profit on top. So we were looking for individuals, a very specific demographic, who were had a lot of disposable income, were interested in art and had a need for a piece of artwork, and who were interested in science.
Yeah.
And it was a very small niche.
Yeah, it's like that middle class, upper middle class
Yeah.
category that you're trying to appeal to, which is hard actually to be able to do that. But no, you definitely achieved a lot from just having your first business. And I want to switch gears because you obviously set up your next business, FitnessGenes, which is the business that we obviously met and we got to know one another. It was originally known as MuscleGenes, which
right.
you didn't like the name.
I didn't.
How did that concept come about in terms of FitnessGenes?
Yeah, there's a great irony to it thinking back, actually, because I'm a huge advocate of resistance training, weight bearing training now, and I did very little back then. I was a runner. I did a lot of sort of more athletic stuff.
Yeah.
Didn't do a lot of gym work, shall we say, a lot of weight bearing training in the gym. I'd go on the running machine, as it were, or on the stepper. But we met just to sort of take a step back a moment. We were at a mutual friend's wedding, Stuart and I, and Stuart, it was one of Stuart's friends from school, and he met another schoolmate there called Daniel Reardon. And Dan was a medical doctor, but also a certified personal trainer. And he ran a gym down in Cardiff. He trained high net worth individuals in this gym. He obviously had a lot of knowledge around how to do that. And muscle building. His focus was on bodybuilding and muscle building. And we were telling him all about Play DNA. We mentioned the sports portrait that we did, looking at these facets of physical performance. And he went, my clients would love this. Like we can use this, we can tailor their training regimes, we can look at their nutrition, what else can we do? And so we all sort of, after the wedding, we got back together again, we talked the idea through. Dan brought in a fourth co-founder, Mark Gilbert, to join us, who was a guy with over 20 years experience in the supplement industry. Also great advocates in the bodybuilding industry. And between us, we came up with MuscleGenes as the concept. And as you say, I hated the name. It felt so raw and so far away from my scientific roots. But Mark and Dan, they absolutely understood the demographic that we were targeting in this case, bodybuilders, mainly male. And that name, it really spoke to them. They understood what they were getting from it. And within a week of putting it on sale, we had a pre-existing route to market, which was very helpful through a question and answer website, which Dan and Mark had set up together. So we were able to just put that out to all of their customers and say, would anyone like a plan based on their DNA? And we had so many people purchase within the first week. We had to take it off sale while we reassessed what we do next, because it was keeping me in the lab for about 4 weeks solid, just processing all of because I was still doing it by hand at that point.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a way it makes you know your audience, because sometimes as an entrepreneur you think of an idea, a concept, and it's it's interesting that you said that you didn't like the name MuscleGenes, yet it's the name that appealed to your target audience. So I think that sometimes is really important. But I want to delve into the science behind FitnessGenes, and I've deliberately not asked you what the product is, because I read your peer-reviewed paper, and that discusses the link between the presence of certain genes. In this case, it was the FTO gene for obesity, and that increasing our chances, our odds of being obese in the future. Break down the science for me, for someone that doesn't understand it, and what are FitnessGenes doing to mitigate that risk?
Great. I'll do my best, because it's very...
No problem.
It is very complex, and we have a
Yeah.
very intelligent in-house science team that spend all their days reviewing all of the data in order to put these algorithms together that make these predictions. We just found out recently, actually, that our patent is going to be granted on it as well, which is really exciting.
Yes.
And that's essentially, the patent covers the way in which we combine this DNA data, genetic data, along with other types of data such as environmental and lifestyle data. We could also include blood data, pre-diagnosis, wearables, microbiome ultimately. But to put this data together and to create nutrition and exercise plans from it. Because what we're essentially trying to do is to create a physiological avatar of an individual by looking at all these different facets of their biology, and genetics is one of them. So as you mentioned, Shivani, we look at, sometimes it's single genes. Occasionally there are single genes which have very large impacts on an individual. So for example, the lactose gene is a good one. That is a single gene which turns the production of an enzyme on or off, depending on if you've got one genetic variant of it or if you've got another. And if the lactase continues to be produced into adulthood, normally for most mammals, the lactase gene gets turned off. It's a weaning mechanism, wean the youngsters off so that they can have another brood, as it were, and move on to something else. But in some adults, particularly in Northern European populations, that lactase gene stays switched on. And that means that they continue producing lactase, which means that you can digest dairy products essentially without getting the stomach issues that so many people will associate with consuming high levels of dairy. Now that's a single gene change, and that's something that we feature on the site. The majority of the changes that we look at the moment, though, are based on multiple genes, because most of the time we're looking at, it's more a burden of risk around a particular physiological condition. So, for example, somebody may carry a lot of genetic variants which are associated with a particular trait, like being obese, and having a high burden of genetic variants associated with obesity, in that population studies have been done and scientists have looked within these groups and seen that there is a particular variant which seems more prevalent within the obese group than the non-obese group. Then we can start to say, right, you've got a burden of these obese genes. Sometimes they have mechanistic effects, a lot of the time they don't. But by understanding that information and understanding what particular risks that puts someone at, we can start to make recommendations around the sorts of interventions that they may want to try that may work best for them based on their unique biology.
And these are all preventative measures, which you've mentioned to me, right?
Absolutely.
That you're not going to be assessing someone's risk of them, of them having a disease or something like that can't be prevented.
No,
and there's no
absolutely.
nutritional...
We're not diagnosing anyone. It's not a clinical test in any way. It's basically a test which looks at, it's a sort of looking at predispositions.
Right.
So it doesn't mean you're going to be obese if you have a burden of these genes, but it does mean that you're more likely than an average person plucked from the population that wouldn't be carrying the same volume of variants. And in some cases we can make, by breaking that down further, so within the weight loss category, for example, weight loss is very complex, or somebody's ability to lose weight or put on weight is very complex. And we could look at facets such as hunger. So that's after you've eaten a meal, how quickly do the chemical messages go to your brain that to tell it you've had a meal, your stomach's full, and to switch off that hunger response. So that's one facet. There is behavioural eating. So how do you behave in particular situations, around a buffet, at parties, at social events? And anxiety, when you're particularly anxious, you will hear people say when they're anxious they overeat, and for other people when they're anxious they don't eat at all.
Right.
Different responses.
Yeah.
You've also then got metabolism impacts on it. Somebody, again, fast or slow metabolism, people are very familiar with that concept. If you've got a fast metabolism, great for keeping the weight off because you're burning all that energy. Not so great if you want to be an elite endurance athlete.
Yeah.
These things are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
And then obviously hormonal changes, hormone response in terms of weight gain, the impact of fat on weight gain and how you react to fat, the impact of sugar and how you react to sugar on your ability to lose weight or gain weight as well. So it's not, weight loss isn't just one thing. It's made up of lots of different things, and depending on whether you identify with an individual that their issue may be with their eating behaviours, say, then you can make very specific recommendations around mindfulness and mindful eating, and taking time out and eating slower, which are more psychological interventions. Whereas if it's something to do with hunger, for example, then you can look at what makes up their macronutrient ratio, essentially, and maybe increase the amount of protein, which has a more of a filling effect. So there's, depending on what you identify within someone's genetics, can help lead you down a path which might be a better way for them to manage a healthy body fat level in this case.
Yeah. I mean, when I was doing my research, I just couldn't believe how much information our DNA can show us. And as you said, it can show us so many things about us. But you have had critics, talk about not necessarily FitnessGenes, but this whole concept of the connection between our genes and that increasing our risks of, say, being obese in the future. And Professor Tim Spector, British epidemiologist, his view is that we cannot use our genes as a personalised predictor of obesity. He then goes on to say in a Times article that DNA testing is the wrong approach. What do you say to that? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm sure Professor Spector is being paraphrased to some extent, because I'm sure even he understands, and I believe it's quoted within that Times article, that for some individuals, their genetics can account for up to 80% of the impact of the likelihood of them being obese, which obviously is a huge amount. And these are particularly penetrant variants, by the way, which are usually very rare variants as well. So not the sort, obviously, that we're talking about at FitnessGenes, where they're more common variants in the population. I think, again, the fact that with genetics is already used as a diagnostic tool across a number of clinical areas. So breast cancer screening, one that people be very familiar with, the BRCA genes, the ApoE variants and their association with various forms of dementia. Now, all of these things, are things that could be pre-screened in people at a young age, and there are, in many cases, nutritional interventions that can be made as a result of finding out this information that can help extend healthy life as a result. So if I found out, for example, that I was a carrier of some of these ApoE variants, then I would probably look at increasing my omega-3 intake in my diet, for example. And, I would look at increasing the amount of exercise. Exercise also has an impact on sort of helping someone to move more towards healthier outcomes. It's very difficult with a lot of these because it's the difference between absolute versus relative risk. And some of these genes are to do with absolute risk, which is basically a predictor that someone is going to get this particular disease in the future. Whereas a relative risk is more to do with putting someone within a particular category where people who are like them are more likely to be within that region, but it doesn't mean that everybody who carries that will. It doesn't provide a percentage chance that somebody's going to get that particular condition, obesity in this case. I mean, what I would say, I think in response, it's a lot of the work that Tim does on the blood glucose monitoring is very interesting. And, there's no doubt that these are all biomarkers ultimately, and the more knowledge that we have about these sorts of things, the more, the more accurate we can make in prediction, the more accurate predictions we can make. But that is looking at, again, one small facet, which is to blood glucose sensitivity and avoiding blood glucose spikes. And the idea behind that is that blood glucose spikes are associated with increased inflammation, and inflammation is bad for our bodily processes, and it can lead to chronic conditions, lifestyle-related diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So by reducing inflammation, you're reducing your chances of getting that. But again, inflammation is just one facet of health. So it's not considering all of the other potential biological systems in that regard. And we do touch on more than just inflammation is one of the categories we look at as well.
Yeah.
But we do also look at many other categories all around sort of brain health, sleep, ability to build muscle, which is just as important for a 50-year-old woman who's going through menopause, for example, as it is for a 20-year-old man who wants to look good in the gym.
Yeah, well, I feel like this information is so useful, and we've talked about this concept of positive psychology, and when you're delivering this information to the people that sign up to your platform, your website, you obviously are talking about the risk of heart health, obesity, which we know can be quite nerve-wracking, but the way you share it is obviously very, very important. How do you ensure that that information is conveyed in a way to ensure that it's not going to upset somebody, it's delivered in the right way? How does FitnessGenes help with that?
It's a really difficult one, actually, and it's something we spend a lot of time discussing internally, and don't always get right. So this is something that we're continually assessing ourselves on too. We find that most of our customers, when we've done consumer research, it's about 1/3 of people to 2/3 that say that they have a particular fear over finding out something about themselves that would be upsetting or that they would find unexpected. These are not the people generally that go on to buy our test. It's almost self-selecting in some ways.
Yeah.
Despite that, we obviously try and present the information in as a positive a way as possible, because our whole aim is around preventative healthcare, and we want to encourage people to undertake healthier behaviour and better behaviour. Again, we can come up with the most precise, accurate plan for someone in the world. Just imagine if someone could conjure up your perfect health plan. It's still no good when it's just sat on paper and you're not following it, which tends to be the biggest problem for people, is to find the motivation to actually follow the health advice in the first place.
Right, yeah.
So that motivational part, as you say, the positive psychology of it is actually really critical to having a successful preventative health product. For us, we tend to focus on, we avoid telling people what not to do.
Yeah.
There's very few occasions within our recommendations you'll find a don't do this. There's a few, and they're the ones that where the association is so strong we just can't get away with not saying it. So everybody will be familiar with the don't smoke, don't drink. We know these things are particularly detrimental to health.
Right. Yeah.
But aside from that, we tend to focus on telling people what they should be introducing to their diet, which again sets us apart from some other personalised nutrition companies.
Yeah.
So the idea for us is, what should you be introducing into your diet for a healthful purpose? Because there's so many types of superfoods and different diet types, and they're all sold to us as the new sort of faddy best thing for you today. But you can't do everything. So for us, it's about distilling it down to those. If I can give a short example, actually.
Yeah.
Just a personal one. We found out last year that my mother had high cholesterol.
Yeah.
And it fell out over a family dinner. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, had just been diagnosed with high cholesterol. And she was telling us, oh no, the doctor's just told me this. And my mum said, oh, I've had that for 10 years. We were both like, hang on a minute, you didn't tell us about this. But she said, the doctor had been giving her all the usual generic NHS advice. My mum is also the same weight as me. She's not overweight.
Yeah.
She exercises 3 times a week. As far as she was concerned, she had a healthy diet. She ate lots of carbs, a lot of pasta.
Yeah.
But she had all of her 5 a day and fruit and veg and that. So I went away, I did the research, had a look at her profile. Understandably, all of us as a family group have genetic variants which are associated with increased risk of high cholesterol, which was now obviously coming out in my mother and my sister, who had slightly less optimal diets than I did at the time. And so I said to them, right, these are the recommendations you need to do. And it's basically 8 things that you're going to introduce into your diet. So didn't talk about taking anything out, didn't, salt or anything like that. We just said, right, 8 foods, just get as much of these 8 foods into your diet as you can. And it was mostly whole foods, so things like flaxseed, oat bran, so mixed in with oats. What else did we have? We had garlic. But we recommended, as well as supplements, just to ensure that they were getting enough garlic in their diet, and also a psyllium husk supplements for fibre. Apples was another one. Phytosterols, very important. So you can get that through, the Benecol style, other brands available, drinks, yogurts and spreads. And also more soy products, interestingly, which was a new one to me. So things like tofu, edamame beans.
Oh, yeah. Like that.
So soy milk, replacing the dairy with the soy milk. So my mum and my sister did this, both of them, and we did blood tests. Being scientists, we like to measure what we're testing. Yeah. So we did a blood test in the first week, and then we did a blood test 3 months later after they'd been following these interventions. And they both, their cholesterol levels dropped in both. My sister's dropped back into the normal range. My mum's dropped by 25% her total cholesterol in 3 months, and 21% in terms of her LDL. And she went back to the doctors, and the doctors just said, what have you been doing? Like, what changed? And she said, well, I just learnt from my daughter what foods I needed to eat, and that was the knowledge I needed. Yeah. And that's just one small example of the way in which a positive change to diets can have such a huge impact in terms of, in my mum's case, the reversal of a particular issue, high cholesterol. In my case, I don't have high cholesterol, but I have all the genetic markers of having high cholesterol when I'm older. So I'm already following these these particular interventions, because I know, for me personally, that this is something where I've got an increased risk. And therefore, in terms of my choices as to what sorts of superfoods I should have in my diet, these are the ones that are most important for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and you managed to mitigate it, which is so, like, fact that your mum actually decided to take that advice on board and do something about it. Sometimes, like you've said, that's what's the difficult thing, is holding yourself accountable, because you have all this information that you've been presented with. Obviously, it's narrowed down and it's very specific, but then the accountability aspect is what needs to kick in and make sure that you're holding yourself to it.
And as you say, Shivani, the key is the positive psychology. Don't say don't do that. Yeah. We're saying flip it, do this. Yeah. And it's a lot easier to add foods. And of course, by adding foods, for most people will then replace. So instead of having like chicken or meat in her stir fries, she would replace it with tofu or beans. Yeah. So it just naturally became a sort of movement towards a healthier diet without having to talk about, the negative of removing particular foods from her diet. Yeah,
I like the idea of adding things in rather than removing, and it's mad how to think that can really have an impact on how you see things. And that's interesting. I want to shift gears, and I want to talk about a time when you righted a wrong, because I found this really, really inspiring. And when I was doing my research into you, I didn't even know that you did this morning interview. I'm going to talk about it, but you were invited to attend a conference in Brussels. You were then barred from attending as you were 6 months pregnant. You were effectively discriminated against by the European Commission. Talk to me about that time. What happened?
Yeah, it was a real shock, because, you really think of the EU obviously being at the forefront of establishing these sorts of rights. So I had to sort of look twice, 3 times and call some of my colleagues over to come and have a read of the email that I'd been sent. Luckily for me, in a way, they'd put it in writing. So, I had that evidence, as it were, that this had happened. It was as a result, they invited me to speak. Ironically enough, it was at a conference promoting STEM for women. Oh my God, so infuriating. Which is, even more mind-boggling that they made the decision that they did. And it was just on sorting out the logistical arrangements as to how I was going to travel from London to Brussels. And I requested travel by train because it would just save me having to worry about potentially having to get a doctor's note, because some airlines have particular rules about flying at 7 months pregnant, which is where I would have been. And they just went, oh, you're pregnant, or we don't think, for your own safety that you should be attending, so we're uninviting you, essentially. So it was really a shock.
Yeah.
My mum, she always, again, told a story about how she was discriminated against at work when she was pregnant with me.
Yeah.
And she lost her job and had to fight to get her job back. And that was back in the 80s. And you think, things have moved on, and then it happens to you, and you think, wow, actually, there's still some walls to sort of break down, as it were. It's still there.
Yeah.
As you say, I tried the route, obviously, of just politely saying, I don't think so. I think, I'll be fine. I'll be the judge of that. And you wouldn't uninvite, if you had an elderly speaker who had a heart condition, you wouldn't uninvite him because you thought he might be a risk to his medical condition.
No.
So why would I be treated any differently? They refused to back down, changed their position. So I had a chat with our legal advisor within the company at the time, just to ask her advice more than anything else. And she suggested, given that, what I wanted was to, as you say, to right the wrong, as it were. This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be allowed. She said, well, let's do a press release and put it through their agency. And, funnily enough, press releases, anti-EU press releases were quite popular with certain news outlets at the time, and it got picked up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then it all blew up on Twitter.
Yeah,
and,
I know. I was just about to say that you took to Twitter, and then all these stories of other women coming forward, talking about their experiences and facing adversity. It shows that community feel, and it makes you frustrated that how can the European Commission have done that? How could they have made a decision like that on your behalf when you very well knew exactly what your status was in terms of your own health and well-being? So it just was really bizarre to me that happened. But did you end up getting a written apology, right? Or
I did. Yes. Unfortunately, the conference itself actually was cancelled because of I think there was a bombing in Brussels at the time.
Yeah.
So they cancelled the conference. But I did get a full written apology on the website, on the EU website, very quickly after the press release went out, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
And also, one of the conditions I asked for was just a phone call with the individual that had made the decision.
Right.
Because I just wanted to understand. I wanted to have a conversation with that person. And it was a middle-aged woman, which I suppose surprised me, because I guess this is my sort of biases, but I thought it would be a man, but it was a middle-aged lady that I ended up speaking to, and she had thought she'd been doing the best thing by me, and I guess that you have some sympathy with the fact that it was coming from the right place, but I think that's why it was so important to have that conversation with her and to out this as an issue, because people have to realise that it's up to the individual to make those sorts of decisions, and by excluding a pregnant woman from speaking on STEM, you're actually doing the very thing that they would invited me there to promote, which is to discourage women from pursuing scientific careers for fear of it impacting on their ability to have family life.
No, the fact that you stood up and you did something about it is inspiring. And I think, how do you know when to take action in those situations? Because there'll be other women that are facing adversity that want to right a wrong, and they don't know whether to do it. They're hesitant. What would you say to those women that are struggling?
I think it's very personal and very situation dependent. You come under a lot of scrutiny as well when it gets that public. And for me, when you've got news articles in places like the Daily Mail with all of the comment sections and the Mirror, I tended not to read those, but certain family members did and got very upset on my behalf. It's something that I think you have to, if you're not it's very difficult to say to an individual, it's your responsibility to take that on behalf of all of, in my case, womankind, as it were. It has to be something that you feel passionately enough about, and be something that that you can cope with. But having said that, I don't regret it in the least.
You shouldn't,
because the support, actually, the outpouring of support, that was as you say, the stories that were shared on Twitter of the sorts of things that women were doing, and also the counter stories, because this is the whole point. There were women that had particularly difficult pregnancies or struggled through the last few months. It's as much for those women, because the whole point is, it's a choice. And if I had a particular issue at 7 months and needed to pull out, well, that would have been life. In the same way, if someone was ill or had a medical condition, they would have had to pull out. It wasn't a case of saying that all pregnant women need to be sort of, superheroes that can do everything.
No.
It's about the fact that it's taking away your choice to do that. So it was really nice to sort of see the support from both sides.
Yeah, really nice that you had the support, obviously, from others. And no, I agree with your decision. I think you did the right thing, personally. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic, because you're in the position where you've obviously set up FitnessGenes, and we talked about the fact that the business itself were encountering a mountain of debt. The money from the Series A investment had been spent. What was your mindset like during that time frame? Because that must have been really tough.
It was. I'd just come back into the company. So long story short, I took an 18-month break. Had a difference of opinion with the board on the strategic direction of the business at the time. I came back in it was March 2020. And from that point, COVID hit a month later. And obviously all of our usual routes to market were shut down. The gyms that we affiliated with were all closed. We couldn't ship kits out. The Royal Mail, the postal offices were closed. So we decided to do a complete pivot. And having had a conversation with a colleague, someone that I'd previously linked in with at a conference, really important to do your networking, of course. He'd contacted me because he knew, obviously, about FitnessGenes, and he was after some saliva testing kits, some sample testing kits, because they were creating a COVID test that was based on saliva as an alternative to the swab-based tests. So I said, come on down. And I'd completely forgot they were already packed up into boxes. So we sat there I think it was a Sunday morning, unpacking all these 500 boxes one by one together, and just got chatting. And he said, we're setting up a lab to do COVID testing. If you want to, we could process samples for you. So I thought about it and thought, well, we're not doing anything else at the moment, so why not do COVID testing? So we went, sure, we'll set something up with you. We basically repurposed because we had a pre-existing platform through FitnessGenes, direct-to-consumer logistics pipeline. So we repurposed that, cloned it, created a COVID platform, and started doing COVID testing. And then when the travel restrictions came in, everything just exploded.
Wow.
And sales went crazy. It went through the roof. We obviously had one of the only saliva-based COVID test kits on the market, which made us particularly popular. And we had a really great sort of 12 months of just doing COVID testing. The whole DNA business sort of got put on the back burner for that 12 months. But the great news was we managed to we managed to refinance the company. We bought ourselves 2 years runway. We paid off all of the debt that the company had built up. And we just put ourselves in a great position then to spend the next 12 months working just solely on product development, which was such a delight after sort of, when you run a startup, you get used to going hand to mouth in terms of finances. Every year you're either raising or you've just raised and you're getting stuck into new projects. 6 months later you need to go out and raise again. You've only ever got 18 months runway, maybe 2 years runway. So it was a real pleasure to just spend that 12 months on product development and creating something really cool.
Yeah, and I suppose it's so unpredictable when you're going through that journey, but you, like you said, you did such an amazing job, and to go from being in debt to then effectively being in a position where you can then seek investment in the long run is such an amazing thing to be in. But I've got a note here. You ended up generating 4.8 million in revenue in 9 months, cleared your debt, and it gave you 2 months, like you said, of runway of funding, which is so impressive. To be able to achieve the 4.8 mil in 9 months is like, that's brilliant. And you must have been so happy that happened, obviously.
Yeah, we were all very proud. We did it on a very small team, and we managed I think the thing we were most proud of, we obviously had an underlying business, and there were a lot of COVID testing companies, and I think we all know this, that popped up at the time. You know, didn't need to worry about any future business. We're quite happy to operate on quite dubious terms most of the time. We had a future business to worry about. We had a customer base to worry about. We wanted good reviews from people. We wanted people to go on Trustpilot and to see what a great company we were. Particularly, we didn't want to destroy our DNA testing business with lots of negative reviews. So we put, and to be honest, this is the ethos of our company anyway, but we put a huge amount of effort into ensuring that we delivered really great customer service to customers, that we were very fair in the way that we managed the testing process. We provided refunds where customers couldn't travel, for example. You know, we, in some cases where kits were delayed because they got lost in the Royal Mail, we would courier them out. We even had our own client services manager drive to someone's house in Brighton once to ensure that they got the test so they could get their flights. So that was really important to us as well, was to maintain our standards, you know, even throughout that really period of high demand with a team of, there were 16 of us in total at the time managing the whole operation.
Wow. Wow. No, you should be proud, because it just goes to show that, you know, your customer service, like you mentioned, it's all in line with the company ethos, which is very, very important. So you should be very, very pleased. But we talked earlier about the patent. Obviously, now we're in a situation where it was originally in pending status. It's going to grant. It's been a 6 or 7 year battle of you being in this position, which is amazing news. But you ended up appointing a patent attorney. How does it feel being in a position where it's now you're, you know, on the other side of things, and it's going to be approved, and it's in the process of being approved?
It has been approved. We've got the intent to grant letter, so it has been approved, which is fantastic. I mean, we're really grateful in these circumstances to our patent attorney, as you mentioned. It was a real case of bringing in someone with particular expertise of dealing, in this case, with difficult European patents in the digital healthcare space. And our representative was an expert in this particular space, and she showed it with her dealings with the patent examiners throughout the process. Very professional, knew the right way to sort of structure the responses. And I think it just, again, goes to exemplify how important it is to bring in professionals into the process at the right moments.
Yeah, I can't agree with that more, because we were talking about this early on, but even on Teams, and I was saying that it's so important to delegate, because especially as an entrepreneur, and I've seen this time in, time out when I've spoken to other entrepreneurs, and they will struggle with the art of delegation. They will feel that they need to do everything themselves, that they can't utilize experts. And I think there's a real fine line. But I was listening to a masterclass. Richard Branson was talking about the fact that being a dyslexic, it's really aided him with the art of delegation when people in general struggle with it day in, day out. So no, that's interesting. But how do you encourage others to delegate, especially as an entrepreneur, when you want to do everything yourself? You don't want anyone else to do it. How do you ensure that you do actually appoint that expert, like you did with the patent attorney?
I mean, I think there's an element of I'm still learning in that. Even after all this time, I've just got so used, as you say, when you're literally the first person in the company and you've done everything. Everything from the lab work to the numbers to the customer service to the emptying the bins.
Receptionist, everything.
So it does take time to sort of develop, as you say, that understanding that sometimes you've just got to think about the best use of your time, because because time's a limited resource.
Yeah.
And thinking about how you spend your time in such a way that you can avoid burning out is really important. And there's areas where, as you say, these are almost the easier cases where you need experts, writing a contract, dealing with a patent, doing some digital marketing.
Yeah.
There's very clear cases in those circumstances for bringing in a specialist and an agency or somebody that understands that, obviously in a much deeper amount than you do. I think where the really difficult delegation comes in is on the tasks where you know actually you're probably the best person to do it, but that there is someone else in your team that could do it, and they could do it adequately. They could do it satisfactorily, probably to a very good standards. Maybe not as good as your own. And I think that's where the really difficult delegation comes in, because it's a case of almost having to say, I accept that I'm lowering my standards on this, that done is good enough. And is better than perfection. And actually, once you've passed that task on and it's got done well, that's opened up your time to do something where it really is critical that your skills are needed in that particular area. And that's where you really find that things fly. So I would say that that's probably where it is most difficult to manage, is making those decisions. And I think a lot of the time it just comes down to practice, understanding, and hiring the right people into your team you can delegate these tasks to, that you trust enough to delegate these tasks to.
Right. And I also think it's removing the ego and recognizing that there's someone else that can do the job and can do as good a job as you. So I think that's important as well. But no, this has definitely been a really interesting conversation. I have one final question and then I'm going to let you go. The next phase is about introducing AI and machine learning into the system. How's that all going to work?
Oh, for FitnessGenes, this is fascinating, and we've got an EPSRC. We're part of an EPSRC research bid for an AI hub at the moment, because this is an area where we know we can really add value to the current product. Essentially, for us, it would be about when people ask us, where's the proof? How can you prove what you do works? Well, the obvious answer to that is any of the recommendations that we follow are healthy advice. What we want to prove is what the difference the impact of the DNA and using DNA makes to it. And where we can start to track some of that and to measure some of that is by gathering feedback from our customers in terms of the actions they're following and the outcomes that they are getting. And we can use devices such as wearables, for example, to track some of this data. And then we can use machine learning algorithms to actually work out where the recommendations we're making are particularly effective, and where perhaps they're not as effective as well, and to effectively re-weight the model so that we put more weighting behind the recommendations where we're seeing a really large impact associated with them, and then lowering the weighting against those where perhaps we're not seeing the impact that we might predict from the research studies that have been associated with that particular variant. So for us, that's the exciting future.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. But thank you so much for coming on.
Cool. Thank you very much, Shivani. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.